The Valkyrie Dominion had conquered 2,000 worlds across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, and they had done so with a method that never failed. They would arrive with overwhelming force, broadcast their demands for total surrender, and then harvest everything the planet had to offer its resources, its technology, and its people. No species had ever truly resisted them, and why would they? The Valkyrie possessed planet-cracking dreadnoughts that could turn entire continents into glass within hours. They commanded fleets protected by quantum, shields that no known weapon could penetrate. Their soldiers numbered in the billions, bred for war and trained from birth to kill without mercy or hesitation. Supreme Admiral Kethvorin stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominance, and reviewed the data on the latest target world with barely concealed boredom. It was a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, and its inhabitants called it Earth. The intelligence reports told him everything he needed to know about these creatures called humans. They were a pre-faster-than-light species, meaning they had not yet discovered how to travel between stars. They had only recently begun exploring their own solar system, with primitive chemical rockets and fragile space stations. Their weapons relied on simple chemical propellants and early nuclear technology. They did not even have a unified planetary government, instead splitting themselves into dozens of competing nations that often fought among themselves. Admiral Kethvorin made a sound that passed for laughter among his species, a dry clicking from deep within his throat. These humans were perhaps the most pathetic targets the Dominion had ever selected, and he almost felt embarrassed to waste the resources of a full armada on such easy prey. But protocol was protocol, and the Dominion always sent overwhelming force. It was not about necessity, but about sending a message to any other species. That might be watching resistance was not just futile, but completely unthinkable. The Armada of Subjugation consisted of 1,400 vessels. There were massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust, sleek destroyers designed for speed and surgical strikes, carrier ships housing millions of ground troops, and support vessels carrying enough supplies to sustain a decade-long campaign. It was enough firepower to conquer 100 worlds, let alone one small blue planet. On a quiet Tuesday morning by Earth's calendar, the Armada translated into the Sol system through a tear in spacetime that briefly outshone the sun. 1,400 ships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the dark purple metal that was the signature of Valkyrie engineering. Admiral Kethvorin ordered his fleet to position themselves between Earth and its sun, and as the massive ships moved into place, they blocked 3% of the sunlight reaching the planet. It was a deliberate show of power, a way of saying, we control even your light, and there is nothing you can do about it. The Admiral opened a communication channel that broadcast on every frequency the humans used: radio, television, satellite, everything. His translators had already decoded their primitive languages, and his message was simple and direct. Inhabitants of the planet you call Earth, I am Supreme Admiral Kethvorin of the Valkyrie Dominion. You are now subjects of our eternal empire. You have 6 of your planetary rotations to surrender unconditionally. Your leaders will present themselves to us for processing. Your military forces will stand down and disarm, and your population will prepare for service to the Dominion. Resistance is not recognized as an option. You have 6 days. He ended the transmission and settled back into his command chair, fully expecting the usual response. Most species immediately descended into chaos when faced with such an ultimatum. There would be riots in the streets, governments would collapse, military forces would either surrender immediately or make desperate, and futile attacks that the Armada would swat aside like insects. But Admiral Kethvorin did not know several very important things about humanity. He did not know that 30 years ago, human astronomers had detected strange signals from a star system 12 light-years away. The signals had been frantic, desperate, clearly the death cries of a civilization being destroyed. Human scientists had analyzed those signals for years, slowly decoding them, and what they learned had changed everything. They learned about the Valkyrie. They learned about the conquests, the harvesting, the absolute extinction of any species that failed to prove useful. They learned that the Dominion was slowly expanding in their direction, and that eventually, perhaps within a few decades, those planet-killing ships would come to Earth. And so humanity had made a decision, a quiet, secret, species-wide decision made by a council of leaders from every nation. They would not wait to be conquered. They would not hope that the threat would pass them by. They would prepare. For 30 years, the greatest minds on Earth had worked in hidden facilities buried deep underground and in secret stations hidden in the asteroid belt. They reverse-engineered what they could from the intercepted signals, invented what they could not copy, and created weapons and defenses that the galaxy had never seen. They did this in absolute secrecy because they knew that if the Valkyrie learned of their preparations, they might arrive sooner than expected. Admiral Kethvorin knew none of this. He saw only a primitive world with primitive technology, ripe for harvesting. He expected surrender or chaos, and he was certain this would be the easiest conquest of his long career. As he watched the blue planet turning slowly below his fleet, he felt nothing but contempt for the small creatures living on its surface. They were insects, bacteria, nothing more than resources to be collected and used. But deep beneath the surface of that blue world, in bunkers that no Valkyrie sensor could detect, humanity was watching the Armada with calm and focused attention. Generals studied the fleet formation and compared it to data they had gathered over 3 decades. Scientists analyzed the energy signatures of the alien ships and confirmed what they had long suspected. Engineers ran final checks on systems that had been tested 1,000 times in secret, and in the quiet command centers scattered across the planet, human leaders looked at each other and nodded. The enemy had finally arrived, and everything was going according to plan. The Valkyrie thought they were predators descending on helpless prey, but they were wrong. They were walking into a trap that had been 30 years in the making, and they had no idea what was waiting for them. Admiral Kethvorin leaned back in his chair and waited for the humans to surrender, completely confident that this world would fall like all the others. He could not have been more wrong. 6 days passed, and Admiral Kethvorin grew increasingly confused by what he observed on the planet below. There was no chaos. There were no riots in the streets. Governments did not collapse. Military forces did not scramble in desperate panic. The humans simply continued their daily lives as if nothing had happened. Traffic still moved through their cities. Their primitive aircraft still crossed their skies. Their satellites still orbited their world. Their radio stations still played music, and their television channels still broadcast entertainment. It was as if 1,400 warships blocking their sunlight meant nothing to them at all. The admiral called his senior officers to the command bridge for a meeting, and none of them could explain what they were seeing. In all the thousands of conquests the Dominion had conducted, no species had ever reacted this way. Perhaps they did not understand our message, suggested one of his captains, a veteran of 200 planetary invasions. Impossible, Admiral Kethvorin replied with irritation. Our translators are perfect, and we broadcast on every frequency they use. They understood us. Then perhaps they are simply too primitive to comprehend the threat, offered another officer. They may not understand what our weapons can do. The admiral considered this. It was possible that a species so young and isolated might not truly grasp the power arrayed against them. Perhaps they needed a demonstration. He had planned to wait for the surrender deadline to pass before taking action, but this strange silence from the humans was bothering him. It felt wrong in a way he could not explain, like an itch in the back of his mind that would not go away. On the morning of the 7th day, Admiral Kethvorin ordered the demonstration protocol. He selected one of his largest dreadnoughts, the Void's Mandate, and gave its captain a simple order: descend to the planet and destroy the landmass the humans called Australia. It was mostly desert and relatively low in population, so it would serve as a perfect example of Velkhori power without destroying too many potential slaves. The Void's Mandate was 3 kilometers long, a massive mountain of crystalline armor and devastating weapons. Its primary cannon could crack a continent in half, and its shields could withstand anything the humans possessed. Its crew of 12,000 served with absolute loyalty to the Dominion. The great ship broke formation and began its descent toward Earth, its hull glowing orange and red as it pushed through the atmosphere. Admiral Kethvorin watched through the sensors of his flagship, expecting to finally see some reaction from the humans below: panic, fear, desperate last-minute attempts to communicate. But there was nothing. The humans simply watched the massive ship descend, their satellites tracking its movement but sending no signals of alarm. The Void's Mandate reached its designated position above the Australian desert, hovering like a metal god over the red earth below. Its captain reported that the primary weapon was charging and would be ready to fire in 60 seconds. 50 seconds passed, then 40, then 30. And then the Void's Mandate simply stopped responding. Admiral Kethvorin stared at his sensor displays in confusion. The ship was still there. He could see it through the visual feeds, but all communication with it had ceased. Its beacon went dark. Its quantum link, which was supposed to be impossible to disrupt, severed completely. "What is happening?" the Admiral demanded. "Get me the captain of that ship." His communication officers worked frantically at their consoles, but nothing they tried could restore contact with the Void's Mandate. The ship hung motionless in the sky above Australia, completely silent and unresponsive. And then, as the Admiral watched in disbelief, the ship began to fade. It did not explode. It did not crash. It did not retreat. It simply grew transparent, like a ghost becoming less solid, until there was nothing left but empty sky. 3 kilometers of crystalline armor, 12,000 crew members, weapons capable of cracking continents, all of it simply vanished as if it had never existed. There was no explosion. There was no debris. There was no energy signature that the sensors could detect. One moment the ship was there, and the next moment it was gone. Admiral Kethvorin felt something cold spread through his chest, a sensation he had not experienced in centuries of military service. It took him a moment to recognize what it was: fear. "Scan for debris," he ordered, his voice carefully controlled. "Scan for energy residue, quantum disturbance, anything." His officers obeyed, but their reports came back empty. There was nothing to find. The Void's Mandate had not been destroyed by any weapon the Velkhori could detect. It had simply ceased to exist. The Admiral refused to accept this. There had to be an explanation, a trick, something he was missing. Perhaps the humans had developed some form of cloaking technology that hid the destroyed ship. Perhaps there was an unusual atmospheric phenomenon interfering with his sensors. He ordered 3 more ships to descend and investigate the destroyer's Silent Death, Conquest's Edge, and Burning Sky. They were smaller than the dreadnought, but still formidable, and they descended in tight formation with their shields at maximum power and all weapons ready to fire. The 3 ships entered Earth's atmosphere together, their captains reporting every few seconds. Everything seemed normal at first. They detected no weapons fire, no energy beams, no missiles or projectiles of any kind. The humans were not shooting at them. The destroyers reached the location where the Void's Mandate had vanished and began scanning for any trace of the lost ship. They found nothing, just empty air and the desert below. And then, exactly as before, all 3 ships stopped responding at the same moment. Their quantum links remained active for exactly 4 seconds after visual contact was lost. And in those 4 seconds, the ships transmitted one final burst of data, the biometric readings of their crews. The readings showed elevated stress hormones, rapid heartbeats, signs of extreme fear. And then every single life sign flatlined at the exact same instant, as if someone had pressed a button and switched them all off. The 3 destroyers faded from existence just as the dreadnought had, leaving behind nothing but empty sky and terrible questions. Admiral Kethvorin stood frozen on his command bridge, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. 4 ships and over 15,000 crew members had simply vanished without any explanation that made sense. He ordered the entire Armada to hold position in high orbit. No more ships would descend until he understood what was happening. Something was very wrong with this planet and these humans. Something his intelligence reports had completely failed to mention. As he stared down at the peaceful blue world below, Admiral Kethvorin realized with growing horror that for the first time in his long career, he had absolutely no idea what he was facing. And somewhere deep in his ancient warrior's instincts, a voice whispered that perhaps this was not hunt after all, perhaps this was a trap, and he had walked his entire Armada directly into it. Admiral Kethvorin demanded answers, but his science officers had none to give him. They ran every scan they could think of, analyzed every piece of data they had collected, and consulted the vast databases of the Dominions collected knowledge, but nothing could explain what had happened to the 4 missing ships. There must be a weapon, the Admiral insisted. Find it. Supreme Admiral, we have detected no weapon discharge of any kind, his chief scientist replied, his voice trembling. No energy beams, no missiles, no gravitational distortions, no quantum fluctuations, nothing at all. According to our sensors, those ships simply stopped existing. This was impossible. Ships did not simply stop existing. There was always a cause, always an explanation, always something that made sense within the known laws of physics. But whatever the humans had done, it was beyond anything the Valkyrie had ever encountered. For 2 days, the Armada held position in high orbit while Admiral Kethvorin tried to decide what to do. He could not retreat, the Dominion did not retreat, and doing so would end his career and probably his life. But he also could not send more ships into whatever invisible trap waited in the planet's atmosphere. On the 3rd day, the messages began. Every ship in the Armada received the same transmission at the same moment, and it did not come through radio or quantum link or any normal communication channel. Instead, the message appeared directly in the navigation computers of all 1,400 ship systems that were supposed to be completely isolated, protected by encryption that would take millions of years to break. The message was simple text, written in the Valkyrie language. We know what you did to the Kathrani, the Voss, the Illuminator, and 1,000 other species you have destroyed. We have been listening to the screams of dying civilizations for 30 years, and we have been preparing for your arrival. Your ships that entered our atmosphere are not destroyed. Their crews are alive. They are currently experiencing what we call aggressive debriefing. We are learning everything. You have one chance. Leave now and never return. This is humanity's only warning. Admiral Kethvorin stared at the message on his screen, his hands shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. How had they done this? How had a primitive species hacked into the most secure systems in the Dominion's fleet? It was not possible. He ordered the message deleted from all systems, and had his technicians purge every computer on every ship. Surely this was just a psychological trick, an attempt to frighten the Armada into retreat. But 40 minutes later, the message reappeared on every screen in the fleet, and this time it came with attachments. The humans had included detailed schematics of every ship class in the Armada, including technical specifications that were classified at the highest levels of Dominion security. They had provided crew manifests, supply inventories, and weapon capabilities that only the Velkhori High Command should know. They even included personal information about Admiral Kethvorin himself, his service record, his family connections, the location of his home on the Velkhori throne world. The Admiral felt the cold touch of true terror for the first time in his life. These humans should not know any of this. Even if they had somehow captured the crews of the lost ships, they could not have extracted this information so quickly. It would take years to break Velkhori mental conditioning, and the personal data about the Admiral was not stored on any ship in the fleet. How were they doing this? Whispers began to spread through the Armada. The crews spoke of demons, of dark magic, of ancient evils that could reach through the void to steal thoughts from living minds. Discipline began to fray as fear replaced confidence. Admiral Kethvorin knew he had to act. He could not allow his fleet to fall apart from terror. He needed to show strength, to remind his crews that the Velkhori were the conquerors, and that no primitive species could stand against their might. He broadcast a message to the entire Armada, his voice steady and commanding. These humans are using tricks and deception to frighten us, but we will not be frightened. They may have some primitive form of hacking technology, but they cannot stop the weapons of the Dominion. We will bombard their planet from orbit, staying safely out of reach of whatever trap they have set in their atmosphere. We will turn their world to glass and show the galaxy that resistance to the Velkhori is always futile. The crews rallied at his words. Yes, this made sense. They would stay in high orbit, far from whatever strange technology the humans possessed, and they would simply destroy the planet from a safe distance. The humans could not stop weapons fire from space. No species had ever been able to do that. The order was given, and the Armada opened fire with everything it had. Plasma lances erupted from the great dreadnoughts. Kinetic accelerators launched projectiles at near-light speeds. Antimatter torpedoes streaked toward the blue world below. It was enough firepower to destroy 100 planets, an apocalypse of energy and destruction aimed at a single small world. Admiral Kethvorin watched the weapon fire descend toward Earth, waiting to see the flashes of impact, the spreading clouds of destruction that would mark the end of human civilization. But the weapons never struck their targets. Approximately 400 kilometers above the planet's surface, every single shot simply curved away. Plasma beams bent like light through a prism. Kinetic projectiles veered off course as if pushed by an invisible hand. Antimatter torpedoes arced around the planet and flew off into deep space. Some of the shots entered decaying orbits and burned up harmlessly in the upper atmosphere. Others were flung out toward the distant stars, and a few impossibly, terrifyingly reversed direction entirely, forcing the Armada's point defense systems to destroy their own weapons before they could hit friendly ships. The entire bombardment, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust, had done nothing but prove that the humans could not be touched. Admiral Kethvorin slumped in his command chair, finally understanding the terrible truth that he had been refusing to accept. These were not primitives. These were not insects to be crushed. The humans had technology that the Velkhori could not understand, could not counter, could not even detect. And as he sat there in stunned silence, a new message appeared on his screen, just 2 words in the human language that his translators quickly converted. Our turn. The hunt had begun, but the Velkhori were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. The first ship to vanish from the main fleet was a destroyer on the outer edge of the formation. One moment it was holding position with all systems normal, and the next moment its transponder went dark, its quantum link severed, and its hull began that terrible fading that the Admiral had seen before. Within seconds, the destroyer was gone. Not destroyed, not fleeing, just gone, as if it had never existed at all. Admiral Kethvorin barely had time to process this before the second ship vanished, then the third, then the fourth. They were being picked off from the edges of the formation, one every 6 minutes, with mathematical precision that spoke of calculated intent rather than random chance. The admiral ordered his fleet to tighten formation, to pull all ships into a defensive cluster where they could protect each other. But it made no difference. The disappearances continued, now taking ships from within the formation itself. Panic began to spread through the Armada like a disease. Crews watched their sensor displays in horror as friendly vessels simply faded from existence. Communications channels filled with terrified voices demanding answers that no one could provide. Officers who had faced death in 100 battles found themselves trembling with a fear they had never known before. "Retreat," Admiral Kethvorin commanded, his pride finally broken by the impossible reality unfolding around him. "All ships, maximum burn for the system edge. We will regroup outside this cursed system and return with reinforcements." The Armada obeyed, their engines flaring to life as 1,400 ships minus the dozens already lost turned away from Earth and accelerated toward the distant jump point. Perhaps if they could just escape the system, they could return to Dominion space and report what they had found. Perhaps the full might of the Empire could succeed where one Armada had failed. But the disappearances did not stop. Even as the fleet fled at maximum speed, ships continued to vanish 2 at a time now, then 5, then 12 in a single horrible moment. The edges of the formation dissolved like ice, melting under a hot sun, and nothing the Admiral ordered could stop it. Some captains broke formation and tried to flee on their own, pushing their engines beyond safe limits in desperate attempts to escape. They vanished just as quickly as the others, their final transmissions cut off mid-scream. Other captains tried to surrender, broadcasting pleas for mercy to the silent planet behind them. They promised to leave forever, to tell the Dominion never to return, to do anything the humans wanted, but the humans did not respond, and these ships too faded into nothingness. Mutinies broke out on several vessels as terrified crews turned against their officers. They demanded surrender, demanded explanations, demanded that someone do something to stop the invisible death that was taking them one by one. But the mutinies achieved nothing. Ships torn by internal fighting vanished just as easily as ships that maintained perfect discipline. By the time the Armada reached the halfway point to the system edge, only 500 ships remained from the original 1,400. 3 days of flight had cost them 900 vessels and millions of crew members, all taken without a single shot being fired. Admiral Kethvorin sat alone on his command bridge, his officers having either fled to other ships or locked themselves in their quarters in catatonic fear. He watched his fleet dying around him and knew with absolute certainty that none of them would escape. The humans were not fighting a battle. They were conducting a harvest, and the Velkhori had become the crop. When the Armada finally reached the system edge, only 340 ships remained. They clustered together near the jump point, waiting for the navigation systems to calculate the coordinates for their escape. But the calculations would not complete. The navigation computers flickered and reset, caught in an endless loop that prevented them from plotting a course to safety. And then, one by one, the engines of every ship in the fleet ignited without any command from their crews. 340 ships began to move in perfect synchronization, their controls no longer responding to Velkhori hands. Admiral Kethvorin hammered at his console, trying to override the commands, trying to regain control of his flagship, but it was like trying to stop a river with his bare hands. The systems simply ignored him. The fleet turned, but not toward the jump point. They turned toward the outer darkness, toward the empty void between stars where no inhabited world existed for thousands of light years. "No," the Admiral whispered, finally understanding what was happening. "No, no, no." The ships accelerated into the darkness, carrying their screaming crews away from any hope of rescue. They were being taken just like the others. But this time, there would be no quick vanishing. This time, the humans wanted them to know what was happening, to understand that they were completely helpless. Admiral Keth Vorn opened a communication channel to Dominion High Command, desperate to send a final message, a warning that might save others from his fate. "This is Supreme Admiral Keth Vorn of the Armada of Subjugation," he said, his voice cracking with terror. "We have failed. The humans are not primitives. They possess technology beyond anything we have encountered. They have taken our ships. They control our systems. They are inside." He stopped, his eyes widening as he noticed something moving in the shadows of his command bridge. There was nothing there, nothing visible, but he could feel a presence watching him, studying him, waiting. "They are inside our ships," he continued, his voice barely a whisper now. "They are in the systems, in the walls, in the air itself. I do not know how they do what they do, but they are everywhere. Do not send more ships. Do not come to this system. The humans are." The presence moved closer, and Admiral Keth Vorn felt his words die in his throat. He wanted to scream, wanted to fight, wanted to do anything but sit there helplessly as the invisible force surrounded him. His final transmission was just 4 words, spoken in a voice so full of fear that the Dominion High Command would replay it for centuries to come. "They are taking everything." And then silence. The quantum link severed. The Armada's beacon went dark. 340 ships carrying millions of Valkyrie warriors sailed into the endless void and were never seen again. The greatest military force ever assembled by the Dominion had simply disappeared, leaving behind nothing but questions and fear. And on the blue planet called Earth, humanity watched them go and began preparing for the next phase of their plan. 70 years passed, and the Valkyrie Dominion never recovered from the loss of the Armada. Oh, they tried to hide it. They told their conquered peoples that the fleet had succeeded, that Earth had been harvested like all the others. But whispers spread through the empire, carried by traitors and slaves and rebels who somehow knew the truth. The mighty Valkyrie had sent their greatest fleet against a primitive world, and not a single ship had returned. The Dominion sent probes to the Sol system, but none of them came back. They sent scout ships, but those vanished too. Eventually, they declared the entire region of space forbidden and tried to pretend that Earth did not exist. But pretending did not make the fear go away. The ruling council of the Dominion found themselves jumping at shadows, wondering if the humans would come for them next, wondering what kind of species could make an entire armada simply disappear. And then, 70 years after the Armada's defeat, a small ship appeared at the edge of the Valkyrie throne world system. It was tiny, barely the size of a shuttle, made of smooth silver metal that reflected the starlight like a mirror. It carried no visible weapons and broadcast no threats. It simply requested an audience with the Dominion's ruling council. The council debated for 3 days. Some wanted to destroy the ship immediately, while others warned that attacking might bring the same fate that befell the Armada. In the end, curiosity and fear won out, and they granted the audience. The ship landed in the great plaza before the council chambers, and a single figure emerged. She was old by human standards, her hair white as snow, and her face lined with decades of life. She walked slowly but steadily, and her eyes held something that made every Valkyrie guard step back without knowing why. She carried a small silver box in her wrinkled hands. The council chamber fell silent as she entered. 12 of the most powerful beings in the Dominion sat on their raised thrones, looking down at this frail old creature who had come alone to the heart of their empire. "I am Ambassador Chun," the human said, her voice clear and strong despite her age. "I have come to deliver a message and to return something that belongs to you." The council leader, a massive Valkyrie named High Lord Verith, leaned forward on his throne. You are very brave or very foolish to come here alone, human. Do you think we have forgotten what your species did to our Armada? I hope you have not forgotten, Ambassador Chun replied. That is rather the point. She set the silver box on the floor before the council and opened it. Inside were 1,400 small crystalline ships, each one glowing with a faint inner light. 70 years ago, you sent 1,400 ships to enslave my world, she said. You expected no resistance because no species had ever resisted you. You believed yourselves to be conquerors, harvesters, gods who could not be challenged. She gestured to the crystals in the box. These contain the complete neural patterns of every crew member from every ship in your Armada. Every officer, every soldier, every technician, their minds preserved in perfect digital form. They are not dead. They have simply been archived. The council members stared at the box in stunned silence. This was impossible. The technology to store a mind in crystal form was beyond even Valkyrie science. We do not kill unless we must, Ambassador Chon continued. Your people have been studied, yes, but they have not been harmed. We now understand everything about your dominion, every secret, every weakness, every atrocity you have committed across 2,000 conquered worlds. High Lord Vareth rose from his throne, his massive form trembling with barely controlled rage. You dare to threaten us with our own people as hostages. We should kill you where you stand. That would be unwise, Ambassador Chun said calmly. You see, I am not just here to return your people. I am here to deliver a message that is, at this very moment, being broadcast to every world in your empire. Alarms began to sound throughout the throne world. Council members called up displays showing emergency reports from across Dominion space. Something was happening on every conquered planet simultaneously. The message is simple, Ambassador Chun said, a small smile crossing her aged face. It says you are not alone. Resist, help is coming. High Lord Vareth lunged toward her, but before he could take 2 steps, guards in the chamber collapsed, their weapons falling from nerveless hands. The council members found themselves unable to move, frozen in their seats by forces they could not see or understand. Please remain calm, Ambassador Chun said. I told you that we studied your Armada for 70 years. We learned everything about Valkyrie biology, including how to temporarily disable your nervous systems. This effect will wear off in about an hour. She walked slowly around the chamber, looking at each frozen council member in turn. You never expected resistance, she said. That was your first mistake. You assumed that because no one had ever resisted you, no one ever could. But we are not like the others. She paused before High Lord Vareth, looking up at his frozen face. Your second mistake was assuming that resistance always looks like fighting. You expected us to meet your ships with weapons, to fight a battle we could not win. But that is not the human way. We are patient. We plan, we prepare. We let our enemies believe they have already won until the moment we take everything from them. She turned and walked back toward the door. For 70 years, we have been building ships, making alliances, and sending messages to every species you have conquered. We have been teaching them what we learned, that the Valkyrie can be beaten, that their technology can be countered, that resistance is not just possible, but inevitable. The alarms grew louder. Reports flooded in from across the Empire slave uprisings on manufacturing worlds, rebellions on military bases, entire fleets refusing orders and joining the growing revolution. Ambassador Chun paused at the door and looked back at the council. You may keep the crystals. Your people deserve to come home. But the empire you built on the suffering of 2,000 worlds is over. The slaves are rising, the conquered are fighting back, and humanity will be there to help them every step of the way. She smiled, and her eyes shone with the light of a species that had looked into the face of annihilation and refused to surrender. We never expected to be conquerors ourselves. That is not who we are. But we are very, very good at helping others become free." She walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a frozen council and a crumbling empire. Within 5 years, the Velcori Dominion was gone, replaced by a coalition of free worlds that stretched across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. And at the heart of that coalition, helping but never ruling, was a small blue planet called Earth. The humans had proven something that the galaxy would never forget. The greatest power in the universe was not in weapons or ships or armies. It was in the unbreakable will of those who refused to kneel. And in the records of 1,000 civilizations, humanity would be remembered forever as the species that taught the galaxy how to resist.